Hey guys, tonight we're dropping you into the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth, Yakutia, Russia, where the thermometer hits minus 71 degrees Celsius and your survival depends on impossible choices. Picture this. You step outside and your breath doesn't just fog. It crystallizes into tiny ice needles that tinkle as they fall to the ground. The locals call it the whisper of the stars. Romantic, right? Except those stars are watching you freeze to death in about 4 minutes if you're not careful. Your eyelashes frost together mid-blink. The moisture in your nostrils solidifies instantly. And that smartphone you were going to use to document your adventure for Instagram? The lithium battery just died permanently because chemistry itself has given up at this temperature. You probably won't survive this, but let's see how long you'd last anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how we're all scattered across the globe, united by our collective inability to fall asleep at reasonable hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been transported magically, scientifically, doesn't matter, to the Sakha Republic, also known as Yakutia, in the dead of winter. It's January, which means you're getting maybe 3 hours of twilight per day. The sun barely crests the horizon before giving up and sliding back down like it's too tired to deal with this nonsense. You're standing in the village of Oymyakon, population about 500, which holds the record for the coldest permanently inhabited settlement on the planet. The official record here hit minus 67.7 degrees Celsius back in 1933, though locals will tell you, with that characteristic Yakut understatement, that it gets a bit colder than the official station's record. Unofficial measurements have captured minus 71 degrees Celsius. But at that point, who's counting? Dead is dead, whether it's at minus 68 or minus 71. The air itself is different here. You take your first breath and immediately regret it. The cold doesn't just chill your lungs, it assaults them. Each inhale feels like you're breathing in broken glass because in a way you are. The moisture in the air has formed ice crystals so fine they're basically atmospheric shrapnel. Your lungs rebel. You start coughing, and that cough forms its own little ice cloud that hangs in front of your face before drifting downward. The Yakut people have learned to breathe through scarves or their sleeves, pre-warming the air before it reaches their lungs. You didn't know that trick yet. Strike one. Let's talk about what you're wearing, because it matters more than you can possibly imagine. Let's say you arrived in what you thought was serious cold weather gear. A North Face parka rated to minus 30 degrees Celsius, some thermal underwear, decent boots, gloves. Congratulations, you're dressed for a chilly day in Minnesota. Not for a place where the temperature is literally more than twice as cold. That parka's insulation is already compressing under the extreme cold, losing effectiveness. Your gloves? They're rated for skiing, not for actual survival. Within 10 minutes, your fingers start to ache. Within 20, they'll go numb. Within 40, you're looking at frostbite. The village around you looks like something from a science fiction movie about a frozen apocalypse. Buildings sit on stilts. Massive concrete or wooden pillars that elevate homes about 2 meters off the ground. This isn't an architectural quirk. It's survival engineering. The ground here is permafrost, frozen solid to depths of up to 1,500 meters. Yes, you read that right. Nearly a mile of frozen earth beneath your feet. If you built directly on this permafrost, your heated home would melt the ground beneath it, and the whole structure would sink into a muddy collapse come summer. The stilts allow air to circulate underneath, keeping the permafrost frozen and your house level. Smoke rises from chimneys in perfectly straight columns. There's no wind right now, which is actually good news. Wind at these temperatures can kill you in minutes rather than the hours you might otherwise have. The smoke doesn't billow or drift. It goes straight up like it's trying to escape the planet entirely. You notice that some chimneys have these weird crystalline formations around them, ice that's formed from the water vapor in the smoke. Even fire can't escape this cold without freezing. You spot a thermometer mounted on the side of a building. It's one of those old-fashioned spirit thermometers because mercury freezes solid at minus 38.8 degrees Celsius, making mercury thermometers useless here. The red line sits at minus 65 degrees Celsius. This is considered a relatively mild day. School is still in session. They only cancel classes when it drops below minus 52 degrees Celsius for elementary students, or below minus 56 degrees Celsius for older kids. Historians still argue whether this makes the Yakut people incredibly hardy or slightly insane, though most scholars lean toward a respectful combination of both. Your fingers are already going numb, and you flex them inside your inadequate gloves. This is the moment, maybe 5 minutes after your arrival, when you realize that everything you thought you knew about cold is adorably wrong. Cold in Yakutia isn't the absence of warmth. It's an aggressive presence, a physical force that wants you dead. It probes every gap in your clothing, finds every exposed millimeter of skin, and begins the process of shutting you down, cell by cell. A local woman walks past you, bundled in what looks like an entire furry animal. Because it is, a traditional Yakut coat made from reindeer hide with the fur facing both inward and outward, creating a double insulation layer. Her face is wrapped in a scarf with only her eyes visible, and even those eyes are protected by some kind of fur-trimmed hood. She glances at you, takes in your inadequate tourist gear, and shakes her head with what you can only interpret as pity. She says something in Yakut, or maybe Russian, you can't tell through the scarf, probably along the lines of, "That idiot's going to die," and continues on her way. You need to make decisions, and fast. The cold is already creeping into your core. You can feel it happening. Your body is prioritizing, shutting down blood flow to your extremities to keep your vital organs warm. Your fingers and toes are the first casualties in your body's desperate triage. The village has a few buildings that look like they might be public spaces, a small store, what might be a community center, some kind of administrative building. You need shelter, and soon. But here's the thing about Yakutia that makes it so fascinatingly deadly. It's not just the cold. It's the combination of cold, isolation, and the complete rewiring of basic physics that happens at these temperatures. Steel becomes brittle and shatters like glass. Rubber turns into rigid plastic. Diesel fuel gels into useless sludge, which is why vehicles here run 24 hours a day during winter. Turning off your engine means you'll never start it again without a blowtorch and several hours of work. The locals have a saying, there are 2 seasons in Yakutia, winter and the month of bad roads. July is the month of bad roads, by the way. The other 11 months are winter. You stumble toward what looks like a shop, your feet already feeling like blocks of wood inside your boots. Each step is a small victory. The door is wrapped in felt and multiple layers of heavy fabric, an improvised airlock to prevent heat from escaping. You push through into a small, dimly lit space that feels like a sauna compared to outside, though it's probably only about 15 degrees Celsius inside. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a face like weathered leather, looks up from a newspaper and immediately starts speaking rapid-fire Russian. You don't understand him, but his gestures are clear. Close the damn door, you're letting the cold in. This shop is a museum of survival. Shelves are stocked with items you'd never see together anywhere else on Earth. Frozen fish stacked like cordwood. They're so frozen they'll stay preserved indefinitely without refrigeration. Why would you need a refrigerator in Yakutia? You need a heater to keep your food from freezing solid. Next to the fish, batteries, stored in a warmer section because cold batteries are dead batteries. Candles, matches, lamp oil, reindeer meat, frozen in blocks. And here's the quirky detail that historians love to point out. Instant noodles are everywhere. This ancient land of indigenous survival has wholly embraced the modern miracle of ramen. Because when it's minus 65 degrees Celsius outside, nobody's judging your culinary choices. The shopkeeper is still talking, and you catch one word you recognize, banya, banya. He's pointing outside and making what appears to be a sleeping gesture. You think he might be offering you a place to stay, or at least directing you to one. The bathhouse, the banya, is central to Yakut survival culture. It's not just where you get clean. It's where you warm your core temperature back up, where you socialize, where you remember what it feels like to be truly warm. But you're here with a mission, remember? The thought experiment. Would you give up your blanket or your food? Let's frame this properly. You've been dropped into Yakutia with limited supplies. You have one sleeping bag rated to minus 20 degrees Celsius, laughably inadequate. A week's worth of food, about 14,000 calories, 2,000 per day, basic fire-starting equipment, a knife, the clothes you're wearing, one wool blanket. And here's the catch. You have to give up either the blanket or the food. Not both, just one. Which do you choose? Your immediate instinct probably screams, keep the food. After all, you can't survive without eating, right? But here's what makes this diabolical. In minus 65 degrees Celsius temperatures, you'll freeze to death long before you starve to death. Hypothermia can kill you in hours. Starvation takes weeks. But, and this is the twist, your body burns calories at an obscene rate trying to stay warm in extreme cold. Your basal metabolic rate could triple or even quadruple. Those 2,000 calories per day? You might be burning 6,000 just shivering. The shopkeeper is still watching you with those patient, ancient eyes. He's seen foreigners before, you can tell. Researchers, adventurers, idiots with YouTube channels, they all come to Oymycon to experience the extreme, and they all have that same look you're wearing right now. The look that says, I've made a terrible mistake. Outside, through the frosted window, you can see the village going about its business. Children wrapped like tiny mummies waddle to school. A man is doing something to his truck's engine, probably the daily ritual of checking that it hasn't frozen into an expensive metal sculpture. Smoke continues its straight-line escape from every chimney. The sky is that peculiar shade of deep blue-purple that only happens in extreme cold at high latitudes, a color that's simultaneously beautiful and threatening. You realize, standing in this little shop at the edge of human habitability, that every single object around you, every structure, every routine, every scrap of clothing represents generations of hard-won knowledge about survival. The Yakut people have lived here for centuries, thriving in conditions that would kill an unprepared person in minutes. They've developed an entire civilization in Earth's freezer, and they've done it without modern synthetic fabrics, without understanding thermodynamics or human physiology, without weather satellites or accurate forecasting. The shopkeeper offers you tea hot, black, strong enough to strip paint. You accept it gratefully, wrapping your still numb fingers around the cup. The warmth is almost painful as sensation begins to return to your hands. He's watching you, and you get the sense that he's evaluating you, deciding whether you're worth the effort of helping or whether nature should just be allowed to take its course. This is your reality now. You're in Yakutia, where the cold is a living thing, where survival is a full-time job, and where you're about to learn lessons that humans aren't supposed to need in the 21st century. The blanket or food question isn't hypothetical anymore. It's life or death, and you need to decide. The tea burns down your throat, warming you from the inside. It's the first moment of genuine comfort since you arrived, and you want to make it last. But the shopkeeper is already gesturing toward the door, toward the world of crystallized air and deadly cold. You have decisions to make, shelter to find, and a crash course in extreme survival to complete. Your fingers flex around the warm cup. Outside, the temperature continues its patient, murderous work. The question remains, blanket or food? Your life depends on getting it right. Your body, right now, is a battlefield. You don't realize it yet because you're still sipping that mercifully hot tea. But on a cellular level, war has been declared. Thermodynamics, those cold, uncaring laws of physics, are actively trying to kill you, and your biology is mounting a desperate defense. Let's zoom in and watch this fight unfold. Because understanding what's happening inside you is the difference between calculated survival and panicked death. Heat moves from hot to cold. Always. It's not a suggestion. It's the second law of thermodynamics, and it doesn't care about your feelings or your survival. Your body is maintaining an internal temperature of roughly 37 degrees Celsius. The air outside is minus 65 degrees Celsius. That's a temperature differential of 102 degrees, which means heat is fleeing your body like passengers abandoning a sinking ship. Every single second, thermal energy is radiating off your skin, conducting through your clothes, and convecting away on any breath of air. You are, quite literally, a heat engine running in reverse, hemorrhaging the very energy that keeps you alive. Your skin is the first casualty. Exposed skin at minus 65 degrees Celsius will get frostbite in under 5 minutes. We're talking actual tissue damage, ice crystals forming inside your cells, rupturing membranes, and causing cell death. But here's the quirky bit that medical researchers love. Frostbite doesn't hurt when it's happening. The cold numbs the nerves so effectively that you won't feel the damage until you warm up again. It's nature's anesthesia, which would be considerate if it weren't attached to the whole destroying your tissue thing. Let's follow what happens when cold air touches your face. Your skin temperature drops immediately. Blood vessels in your skin constrict, a process called vasoconstriction, trying to reduce heat loss by minimizing blood flow to the surface. This is your body being smart. Sacrifice the skin to save the core. Your fingers, toes, nose, and ears are expendable in the grand scheme of keeping your brain and heart functioning. Evolution has done the math, and it has decided you can live without a few fingers but not without a working liver. But here's where it gets interesting. After a few minutes of this vasoconstriction, your body does something that seems completely counterproductive. It suddenly floods your frozen extremities with warm blood again. This is called cold-induced vasodilation, or the hunting response, and scientists still debate exactly why it happens. The leading theory is that it's a protective mechanism to prevent tissue damage. Your body is trying to save your fingers by periodically warming them up, even though this costs precious calories and heat. It's like your biology can't quite decide whether to sacrifice your extremities or defend them, so it does both in alternating cycles. You step back outside after finishing your tea, and immediately your respiratory system joins the battle. Remember that broken glass feeling when you breathe? Here's what's actually happening. The air is so cold that it's literally flash freezing the moisture in your respiratory tract. Your nose tries to warm and humidify incoming air. That's its job. But at minus 65 degrees Celsius, it can't keep up. The cold air reaches your bronchi, the tubes leading to your lungs, and they react by constricting, narrowing the airways. This is bronchospasm, and it's why you feel like you can't get a full breath. The Yakut people have evolved, yes, actual genetic evolution over generations, to handle this better. Studies have shown that indigenous populations in extreme cold environments have wider nasal passages and more efficient heat exchange systems in their respiratory tracts. It's a real-time example of human evolution that happened in just a few thousand years. Meanwhile, you, with your temperate climate genetics, are wheezing like you just ran a marathon. Your eyes are watering, which is a problem because tears freeze. You blink, and your eyelashes stick together slightly. Each blink requires a tiny bit more force to overcome the ice crystals forming on your lashes. This is why Yakut hunters often wear special goggles carved from wood with tiny slits to see through. They learned centuries ago that protecting your eyes from the cold wasn't just about comfort. It was about maintaining vision when your life depended on it. Now let's talk about the metabolic furnace. Your body generates heat through metabolism, the chemical processes that keep you alive. At normal temperatures, you produce about 100 watts of heat just existing, roughly the same as a bright incandescent light bulb. But in extreme cold, your body kicks into overdrive. You start shivering, which is involuntary muscle contraction designed to generate heat. Shivering can increase your heat production by 5 times, up to 500 watts. That sounds great until you realize that this metabolic spike requires fuel, lots of it. This is where the blanket versus food question starts to reveal its complexity. Your body is burning through calories at a terrifying rate. The basal metabolic rate, the energy you need just to stay alive while resting, can double or triple in extreme cold. Add in any physical activity, like walking through snow or gathering firewood, and you might be burning 5,000 to 7,000 calories per day. Those 14,000 calories you have, that's maybe 2 to 3 days of fuel, not 7. But here's the cruel catch-22. Without insulation, you'll burn through those calories even faster trying to stay warm, and you'll still freeze to death before you run out of food. With better insulation, you conserve calories because your body doesn't have to work as hard to maintain core temperature. The blanket isn't just comfort, it's metabolic efficiency. Your blood is doing interesting things too. In cold conditions, your blood actually thickens slightly, becoming more viscous. This is partly because you're losing fluid through respiration. That cloud of breath you keep exhaling is water leaving your body, and partly because cold blood just flows differently. Your heart has to work harder to push this thicker blood through constricted blood vessels. Blood pressure rises. Your cardiovascular system is under stress it never experienced back home in your climate control department. There's a phenomenon called cold diuresis. that's about to make your life even more complicated. When you're cold, your body shunts blood from your extremities to your core, which increases the volume of fluid in your central circulation. Your kidneys interpret this as excess fluid and start producing more urine. So even though you're not drinking much, you're peeing more, which dehydrates you, which makes you more vulnerable to cold, which makes you pee more. It's a vicious cycle that has killed more than a few unprepared Arctic travelers who couldn't figure out why they were so thirsty in a frozen wasteland. Let's descend to the cellular level. Inside each of your cells, mitochondria are working overtime, breaking down glucose and fat to produce ADP, the energy currency of life. But at extreme temperatures, this process becomes less efficient. Enzymes that facilitate these reactions are temperature dependent, and while your core temperature is still normal, the tissues closer to your skin are cooling down, and their cellular machinery is slowing down. It's like trying to run a factory when half the workers are moving in slow motion. Ice crystals are the real killers at the cellular level. When tissue freezes, ice crystals form inside and between cells. These crystals are sharp, jagged little structures that puncture cell membranes. Even worse, as ice forms, it draws water out of cells, concentrating the salts and other solutes inside to toxic levels. Cells dehydrate and their internal chemistry goes haywire. When you eventually rewarm frostbitten tissue, the damaged cells die, and that's when you feel the pain, intense, burning, horrific pain as nerve endings come back online and report the catastrophe. Historians still argue whether the Yakut people understood any of this physiology, but they certainly understood the practical outcomes. They knew that wet skin froze faster than dry skin, so they developed clothing that wickeded moisture away from the body. They knew that breathing directly into fur would create dangerous ice buildup, so they designed breathing vents in their face coverings. They knew that alcohol made you feel warm while actually making you colder. Vasodilation from drinking sends warm blood to your skin where it radiates away. So traditional Yakut culture had strict rules about drinking in extreme cold. You're walking now, trying to find shelter for the night, and you can feel your body's energy reserves depleting. You're shivering continuously, which is exhausting. Your muscles are burning through glucose, and you're starting to feel that hollow, shaky feeling that signals low blood sugar. This is your body telling you it needs fuel now to keep the metabolic fires burning. Here's a quirky fact that survival researchers discovered. Mental function declines in extreme cold, even before hypothermia sets in. The brain is an energy hog, consuming about 20% of your body's total energy at rest. When your body is in crisis mode, desperately trying to stay warm, it starts to ration energy away from non-essential functions, and apparently, complex thinking is considered non-essential. Your decision-making gets worse right when you need it most. You become confused, irritable, and prone to catastrophically bad choices, like deciding to take off your clothes because you feel hot, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing that happens in late-stage hypothermia when the muscles controlling vasoconstriction become exhausted and suddenly flood your skin with warm blood, creating a false sensation of overheating. You haven't reached that stage yet, but you're on the road. Your core temperature is still normal, around 37 degrees Celsius, but it's taking everything your body has to maintain it. You're in the zone that researchers call cold stress, where your body is compensating effectively but at a high metabolic cost. If you don't find proper shelter and insulation soon, you'll progress to cold strain, where your body starts losing the battle and your core temperature begins to drop. A core temperature drop of just 1 degree, from 37 degrees Celsius to 36 degrees Celsius, causes noticeable symptoms: shivering, confusion, slurred speech. Drop to 35 degrees Celsius and you're in mild hypothermia territory. Violent shivering, difficulty using your hands, stumbling. At 32 degrees Celsius, moderate hypothermia, shivering stops, which is bad. It means your muscles are giving up, serious confusion, drowsiness. Below 28 degrees Celsius and you're in severe hypothermia. Unconsciousness, barely detectable pulse, apparent death. Below 24 degrees Celsius, you're probably not coming back. The cruel irony is that hypothermia feels peaceful at the end. The shivering stops, the confusion fades into dreamy detachment, and you just feel sleepy, tired, like you could just lie down in the snow for a quick nap. Victims are often found having burrowed into small spaces, under beds, into closets, into snow banks, an instinctive response called terminal burrowing that nobody fully understands. Maybe it's a last-ditch attempt to find shelter, or maybe it's the brain reverting to some ancient mammalian hibernation instinct. Either way, it's usually the last thing they do. You spot a small structure ahead. It looks like it might be a storage shed or a shelter specifically built for travelers. In Yakutia, leaving such shelters stocked with firewood and basic supplies is common courtesy, because everyone understands that the cold is the enemy, not each other. You stumble toward it, your feet feeling like they belong to someone else. The physics of your situation is brutally simple. Your body is a thermal system trying to maintain equilibrium against an enormous temperature gradient. You're losing heat through 4 mechanisms: radiation, infrared heat radiating off your skin; conduction, direct contact with cold objects; convection, heat carried away by moving air; and evaporation, moisture from your breath and any sweat. Each of these pathways is bleeding you dry of thermal energy. The only way to survive is to either reduce heat loss or increase heat production. Better insulation, like say a blanket, reduces heat loss. More food provides the fuel for increased heat production through metabolism. But you can only choose one, remember? The physics doesn't care about fairness. Your breath is coming in ragged gasps now, each exhalation a plume of ice crystals that catches the fading light. Your lungs ache, your face is numb. Your fingers inside your gloves have passed through pain into an ominous absence of feeling. This is your body making choices, deciding what to save and what to sacrifice. Welcome to the battlefield. Your biology versus thermodynamics. The fight of your life, playing out in every cell, every breath, every desperate beat of your heart. And you haven't even made it through the first day. You reach the small structure, more of a hut than a proper building, and push through the door with numb hands that barely respond to your brain's commands. Inside, it's dark, silent, and maybe 5 degrees warmer than outside, which feels like a tropical paradise by comparison. Your eyes adjust slowly. There's a small metal stove in the corner, a pile of firewood that looks like it was blessed by angels, a shelf with some mysterious bundles wrapped in canvas, and a wooden platform that serves as a sleeping area. This is it. This is your home for the night. Maybe longer, depending on how badly you've already screwed up. The first rule of shelter in extreme cold, and this is something the Yakut people figured out roughly 1,000 years before anyone wrote it in a survival manual, is that location matters more than construction. This hut sits in a slight depression, protected from the wind by a natural rise in the terrain. Wind is the multiplier that turns dangerously cold into instantly lethal. Wind chill at minus 65 degrees Celsius can make the effective temperature feel like minus 80 degrees Celsius or colder. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes. The Yakut built their winter camps in valleys, behind ridges, anywhere that blocked the wind. Smart survival isn't about fighting nature with brute force. It's about using nature's own geometry against itself. You drop your minimal gear on the floor, the sleeping bag, the inadequate blanket, the small pack of food, and stare at the stove. Getting fire going is priority 1 because without heat, this shelter is just a wooden coffin that happens to be slightly insulated. You've got matches, thank God, and the firewood looks dry. But here's where modern people make their first critical mistake. They try to build a fire the way they learned at summer camp, with kindling arranged in a cute little teepee, adding logs gradually. In Yakutia, you don't have time for gradual. You need heat, fast, and lots of it. The traditional Yakut method is to stuff the stove full of wood immediately, dense, resinous wood if you can get it, and light it in multiple places at once. The goal isn't a cozy, sustainable fire. The goal is a raging inferno that will raise the interior temperature above freezing as quickly as possible. Because every minute you spend in the cold is minutes you're burning calories you can't replace and damaging tissue you can't repair. Your fingers fumble with the matches. The cold has made you clumsy, and it takes 3 tries to get one lit. The tiny flame looks impossibly fragile, like it might give up at any moment. You touch it to some bark shavings someone kindly left in the stove, and watch as the flame catches, grows, spreads. You add more kindling, then larger pieces, then split logs. Within minutes, the stove is roaring, and the metal surface begins to tick and ping as it expands from the heat. Here's a quirky detail that engineers love. Metal behaves strangely at extreme cold. The stove you're using is probably made of steel, and steel becomes brittle at very low temperatures. Below about -40 degrees Celsius, steel can shatter under impact like glass. The Yakut learned this the hard way over generations, which is why traditional structures here use almost no metal fasteners. Everything is wood and leather and rope, materials that don't become death traps when the mercury drops. Your modern metal stove works because it was designed specifically for these conditions, probably thicker metal, special alloys that resist cold-induced brittleness. The heat starts to fill the small space, and you feel something close to euphoria. Warmth. Actual, genuine warmth. You hold your hands near the stove. Not too close, because frostbitten tissue and sudden heat is a recipe for serious damage. And feel the blood returning to your fingers. It hurts. God, it hurts. The pain is intense, burning, like your fingers are being stabbed with hot needles. This is actually a good sign. It means the tissue is still alive and nerves are functioning. What you don't want is the absence of pain, because that means the nerves are dead. Now comes the crucial decision about shelter design. The hut you're in follows traditional Yakut principles, but you need to understand why or you'll make fatal mistakes. First, the sleeping platform is elevated about half a meter off the floor. Heat rises, and in a small shelter like this, the temperature gradient is extreme. At floor level, it might be -10 degrees Celsius. At sleeping height, it could be +5 degrees Celsius. Those 15 degrees are the difference between hypothermic death and uncomfortable survival. Second, there's a small ventilation hole near the roof. Your instinct, and the instinct of many people who freeze to death, is to seal every crack, trap every bit of warmth. But carbon monoxide from the stove needs somewhere to go, or you'll die in your sleep from poisoning instead of cold. The Yakut have lost people this way over the centuries, which is why proper ventilation is now non-negotiable in winter shelter design. You're balancing two forms of death, freezing or asphyxiation. Welcome to Yakutia, where everything is trying to kill you, and your job is to choose the slowest method. The shelter itself is constructed from multiple layers. The walls aren't just single planks. They're double or even triple-walled with air gaps in between. Air is an excellent insulator when it's trapped and still. It's the principle behind double-paned windows and down jackets. The roof is piled with earth and moss, creating a thick insulating layer. Snow, paradoxically, is also insulation. If snow accumulates on your shelter, you generally want to leave it there. A meter of snow can have an R value similar to fiberglass insulation. The Inuit knew this. Their igloos used the insulating properties of snow itself. The Yakut use earth, wood, and strategic design to achieve the same effect. You're warming up now, and with warmth comes a new problem: moisture. Your clothes are damp with sweat from your exertions, from the condensation of your breath, from the snow that melted against your body heat and then tried to refreeze. Wet clothing in the cold is a death sentence. Water conducts heat about 25 times faster than air, which means wet insulation is basically no insulation. You need to dry everything immediately. This is where the Yakut technique of the drying rack comes in. You notice a wooden frame suspended above the stove, and you realize it's specifically designed for hanging wet clothes. You strip off your outer layers, the parka, the pants, the gloves, and hang them up. Steam begins to rise almost immediately. The heat from the stove pulls moisture out of the fabric, and the ventilation carries it away. Within an hour, your clothes will go from dangerously wet to merely damp. By morning, they should be dry. But now you're sitting in your underwear in a barely heated hut, and this presents its own risks. You're vulnerable, exposed, dependent entirely on that fire staying lit. This is the moment when you truly understand the blanket versus food dilemma. You pull out your sleeping bag and the wool blanket, and you do the math in your head. The sleeping bag is rated to -20 degrees Celsius, which means it'll keep you alive, barely, down to that temperature. But it's going to be -65 degrees Celsius outside tonight, and even with the fire, the interior of this hut will drop below -20 degrees Celsius once the fire dies. And it will die because you can't tend it while you sleep, and you don't have enough firewood to keep it burning all night anyway. The wood pile looks substantial, But feeding a fire hot enough to heat this space takes more fuel than you'd think. You've got maybe 6 hours of burn time if you're lucky. The wool blanket could make the difference. Wool is magical stuff. It insulates even when wet, it's naturally flame-resistant, and it creates tiny air pockets that trap heat. Layering it over your sleeping bag could extend your survival range by 10 or even 15 degrees. That could be the margin between waking up and not waking up. But you're already hungry. Not starving, not yet, but hungry in a way that feels different from missing lunch back home. This is your body sending urgent signals. I'm burning fuel at an incredible rate, and I need more. You've got a week's worth of food, but as we discussed, you're probably burning through 3 or 4 days worth of calories every 24 hours. Do the math. You're looking at maybe 2 days of fuel, 3 if you ration carefully and don't move much. Here's where the physics gets philosophical. Insulation preserves the heat you generate. Food provides the fuel to generate heat. One is efficiency, the other is power. It's like asking whether you'd rather have a fuel-efficient car with a small tank or a gas guzzler with a large tank. Either way, you're going to run out eventually, but the route to empty looks different. The traditional Yakut approach didn't involve this choice because they had both massive fur clothing systems and a continuous supply of high-calorie food from hunting and storing. A Yakut winter diet is heavy on fat and meat. Reindeer, horse meat, fish, and mare's milk frozen into chips. Fat is crucial. It provides 9 calories per gram versus 4 for carbohydrates or protein. A diet of pure fat could theoretically sustain you on fewer total grams of food, though your digestive system might rebel. You check your food supplies. You've got modern backpacking food, freeze-dried meals, energy bars, some trail mix. Maybe 2,000 calories per day if you stretch it. Not nearly enough for what your body is demanding, but better than nothing. You could eat half rations and make it last 4 days instead of 2, but half rations when you're burning 6,000 calories a day means you're still running a 4,000 calorie deficit. Your body will make up the difference by burning your own fat and eventually muscle tissue. You'll waste away while staying cold. A miserable combination. Historians still argue whether the traditional Yakut people ever faced this binary choice, or whether it's a modern thought experiment that wouldn't have occurred to them. In their world, you prepared extensively before winter, stored massive quantities of supplies, and lived in established communities with mutual support. The idea of one person, alone with insufficient supplies, would have seemed bizarre. Survival wasn't an individual sport. It was a communal effort spanning generations. But you're not in traditional Yakutia. You're in the thought experiment version, and you have to choose. The fire crackles and pops. A log shifts, sending up a small shower of sparks. The heat feels glorious, and you want to believe it will last forever, but you know it won't. In a few hours, the fire will burn down to coals, then embers, then cold ash. The temperature will plummet, and you'll be alone in the dark with whatever choice you made. You spread the sleeping bag out on the platform and lay the blanket on top, testing the combination. Feels substantial, reassuring. Then you imagine giving this up, relying only on the sleeping bag and whatever calories you can extract from food to keep your metabolic furnace burning hot enough to compensate. Seems insane. Probably is insane. But the food sits there, a small pile of packages and bars, and you imagine giving that up instead. Going to sleep with a full belly tonight? Maybe, but waking up tomorrow with nothing to fuel the continuous caloric burn that extreme cold demands. You'd be betting that you could find food, hunt, trap, forage, in an environment where you're a complete amateur and the locals spend years learning these skills. The odds are not in your favor. The shelter is warming nicely now. You estimate it's reached maybe 10 degrees Celsius in here, which feels tropical after the outdoor brutality. Your wet clothes are steaming on their racks. Outside, through the small window, you can see the last traces of daylight fading into that deep purple-blue twilight. The stars will be out soon, brilliant and cold and utterly indifferent to your survival. You have to choose, blanket or food, insulation or fuel. The physics is clear, but the correct answer isn't. Both paths lead to a version of suffering, and you're trying to pick the one that leads to slightly less death. The fire pops again, as if urging you to decide. What's it going to be? Let's actually work through this properly. because your life depends on getting the math right, and math doesn't care about your feelings. You sit on the sleeping platform, staring at your two options like they're jury members deciding your fate. The blanket lies there, innocent and woolen. The food sits in its pile, wrapped in shiny plastic that promises calories and continued existence. One has to go. Choose. Option A. Keep the blanket, surrender the food. You'd have maximum insulation. Sleeping bag plus wool blanket. A combination that might keep you alive down to minus 35 degrees Celsius or even minus 40 degrees Celsius if you're lucky and the shelter holds some residual heat. But you'd be running on empty. Your body would begin cannibalizing itself almost immediately, burning through fat reserves, then muscle tissue, then eventually vital proteins. You'd grow weaker each day, less able to gather firewood, less able to maintain the shelter, less able to make rational decisions. Death by starvation in extreme cold is particularly cruel because hypothermia usually gets you first. As your metabolism crashes from lack of fuel, you lose the ability to generate heat, and you freeze even inside your cocoon of blankets. Option B. Keep the food, surrender the blanket. You'd have fuel for maybe 3 days at the rate you're burning calories, possibly 4 if you barely move and ration carefully. But you'd be relying entirely on that 20 degrees C-rated sleeping bag in temperatures that will drop below minus 50 degrees Celsius in the dead of night. The physics here is brutal. Your sleeping bag would be operating at roughly 3 times beyond its rated capacity. You'd be shivering violently all night, every night, burning through calories at an accelerated rate just to maintain core temperature. The shivering would prevent deep sleep, leading to exhaustion. Exhaustion would impair judgment. Bad judgment would kill you. But here's the thing neither option captures. There's a third factor, and it's the one that decides everything. Time. How long do you need to survive? If this is a 2-day ordeal, if rescue is coming, or if you just need to outlast a particularly bad cold snap, then the answer is clear. Keep the blanket, skip the food. Humans can survive weeks without food, but only hours without proper insulation in these conditions. You could make it 48 hours on body fat alone if you stayed warm enough to prevent your metabolism from going into crisis mode. But if this is a week-long survival situation or longer, then you need calories because insulation without metabolic heat is just a slower way to freeze. Your body needs fuel to run the furnace, and no amount of blankets can replace the heat generated by your own metabolism. The Yakut people would tell you, in their characteristically blunt way, that this is a stupid question because you need both, and anyone who ends up in a position where they have to choose one has already made catastrophic errors in planning. They'd be right, of course, but that doesn't help you now. Let's talk about what happens to the human body during starvation in cold environments, because it's worse than regular starvation. Your body stores energy in 3 forms: glycogen, quick-access carbohydrates stored in muscles and liver, fat, long-term energy storage, and protein, your actual body structure, which gets cannibalized as a last resort. In normal conditions, you've got maybe 2,000 calories of glycogen, 100,000 or more calories stored as fat, depending on your body composition, and another 24,000 calories theoretically available from protein, though accessing that means you're literally consuming yourself. In extreme cold, your body burns through glycogen within the first day, maybe faster if you're active. Then it switches to fat, which is good, that's what fat is for. But here's the cruel twist. Converting fat to energy is metabolically expensive and requires specific nutrients and enzyme cofactors that come from food. Without any dietary intake, the conversion process becomes less efficient. You get weaker faster than you would in a temperate environment because the extreme cold demands more energy while simultaneously making energy production less efficient. There's also something called starvation hypothermia, which is exactly what it sounds like. As your body runs out of fuel, it can no longer maintain core temperature, and you begin to experience hypothermia even in relatively mild conditions. People have died of hypothermia in 15 degrees Celsius, whether because they were also starving. The combination is synergistically deadly. Now let's run the numbers on the food option. You've got 14,000 calories. You're burning approximately 6,000 per day in this environment. That's a conservative estimate that assumes you're not doing anything strenuous, just maintaining basic shelter and keeping the fire going. Maybe you could drop that to 5,000 if you moved very little and kept perfectly warm. But remember, without the blanket, you won't be perfectly warm. You'll be shivering, which burns more calories. So let's say 6,500 calories per day with inadequate insulation. 14,000 divided by 6,500 equals 2.15 days. Just over 2 days of fuel. On day 3, you're running on fumes. By day 4, you're in serious metabolic crisis. Your body will try to reduce caloric burn by lowering your basal metabolic rate. You'll feel sluggish, stupid, exhausted. But there's a limit to how much it can throttle back when the environment is actively trying to freeze you. Here's a quirky fact that nutritionists discovered through tragic historical examples. The human body can adapt to chronic caloric restriction, but it needs time, weeks or months. Your metabolism can learn to function on fewer calories by becoming more efficient, reducing muscle mass, slowing down non-essential processes. But acute starvation, the kind you're facing, doesn't give your body time to adapt. It's a cliff, not a slope, and you're running straight toward the edge. So what's the smart choice? Let's think like a Yakut elder who's seen 100 winters and buried the people who made stupid decisions. The blanket is passive. It doesn't run out. It doesn't expire. It works the same on day 1 as on day 7, assuming you keep it dry. There's a permanent reduction in heat loss, which means a permanent reduction in required caloric intake. If the blanket lets you drop your daily burn from 6,500 calories to, say, 4,500 calories by reducing the shivering and metabolic crisis from inadequate insulation, then you've just extended your food supply from 2.15 days to 3.11 days. Not a huge gain, but something. Wait, let's recalculate that. If you keep the food but lose the blanket, you're burning roughly 6,500 calories per day and have 14,000 total. Approximately 2.15 days. If you keep the blanket but lose the food, you're burning maybe 4,500 calories per day less because better insulation means less shivering, but you have 0 external calories. You're running entirely on body fat. Let's say you're an average person with 15 kilograms of fat. That's about 135,000 calories stored. At 4,500 calories per day, that's 30 days of energy. 30 days. But wait, there's a catch. You can't actually access all that fat efficiently without any food intake at all. In complete starvation, your body goes into ketosis, burning fat for fuel, but the process is slower and less efficient than normal metabolism. You might only be able to sustain 3,000 calories per day from fat stores before your metabolism starts shutting down. And in extreme cold, metabolic shutdown means death. Historians still argue whether traditional survival cultures understood these metabolic details or just learned through brutal trial and error that certain practices kept people alive. The Yakut practice of eating massive amounts of fat wasn't based on biochemistry textbooks. It was based on the empirical observation that people who ate fat survived winters better than people who didn't. You're overthinking this, you realize. The cold is making you fuzzy-headed, and you're running thought experiments inside thought experiments. Let's simplify. The real answer, the answer a Yakut survivor would give, is that you keep the blanket and you find more food. The blanket is irreplaceable in your current situation. Food, theoretically, can be obtained. Fish under the ice if you can break through. Rabbits if you can trap them. Birds if you're lucky. Pine bark and other forage if you're desperate. It's not easy, and you'll probably fail because you don't have the skills, but it's possible. Whereas if you keep the food and abandon the blanket, there's no finding more insulation. You're not going to stumble across a reindeer, kill it, skin it, and tan the hide into usable clothing in the 3 days before your food runs out. That's a weeks-long process even if you know what you're doing. The blanket buys you time. Time to learn. Time to adapt. Time to get lucky. You make your decision. You carefully fold the wool blanket and place it on top of your sleeping bag, creating a layered insulation system. Then you take the food, all of it, and set it outside the door. It'll freeze solid within minutes, perfectly preserved but completely inaccessible. You've made your choice. Immediately, you feel the psychological weight of it. Your stomach growls, as if it knows what you've just done and wants to file a formal complaint. You have maybe half a protein bar left in your pocket from earlier, your last meal until you figure out how to become a hunter-gatherer in the world's least forgiving environment. The fire is burning down. You add more wood, trying to build up a bed of coals that will last as long as possible into the night. The shelter has reached a comfortable temperature, maybe 15 degrees Celsius, and you know it won't last. In a few hours, the fire will die, and the cold will creep back in like a living thing, probing for weaknesses in your defenses. You crawl into your sleeping bag with the blanket wrapped around everything, creating a burrito of insulation. The wool smells faintly of lanolin and old campfires. It's heavy, reassuring, substantial. You've made the bet that this weight, this simple piece of woven sheep hair, is worth more than a week of food. Outside, the temperature continues its nightly plunge. The village has gone quiet except for the occasional dog barking. The stars are out, brilliant against the black sky, undiminished by light pollution because artificial lights in Yakutia are weak and sparse. The constellation Orion hangs overhead, the same stars ancient Yakut hunters watched while making their own calculations about survival and sacrifice. You close your eyes. Hunger gnaws at your belly, but you're warm, genuinely warm, for the first time since arriving. The blanket has already proven its worth. Tomorrow you'll have to become a provider. Tonight you sleep, wrapped in wool and hope, gambling everything that you made the right choice. The fire crackles softly, counting down to darkness. You wake to absolute darkness and cold that has seeped through your defenses like water through cracked stone. The fire died hours ago. You can tell because the shelter's interior temperature has equilibrated with the exterior, minus maybe 10 degrees of residual insulation from the walls. Your breath forms clouds you can't see but can hear. A soft crystalline tinkling as moisture freezes mid-air. The blanket is performing miracles. You're cold, deeply cold, but you're alive and conscious. Without it, you'd probably be in the early stages of hypothermia right now, confused and lethargic, making the kind of bad decisions that end with searchers finding your body in spring. The Yakut people have lived in this environment for at least 800 years, maybe longer. The exact timeline is one of those things historians still argue about because the early Yakut didn't leave written records, just oral histories and increasingly sophisticated survival technologies. They arrived in this region sometime between the 13th and 14th centuries, migrating north from the Lake Baikal area, and somehow decided that this frozen hellscape was worth settling. Anthropologists debate whether they were fleeing enemies, following animal herds, or just incredibly bad at reading maps. Whatever the reason, they stayed, and over generations they didn't just survive, they developed one of the most sophisticated cold weather cultures on the planet. You fumble in the dark for your matches. Your fingers are stiff but functional. That's the blanket's doing, keeping your core warm enough that your body isn't sacrificing extremities yet. You strike a match, and the tiny flame illuminates the shelter in flickering orange. The wood pile has dwindled. You've got maybe enough for one more day of intermittent fire, which means today you need to accomplish two things. Find more firewood and find food. Without the blanket, you'd need to add a third priority, find better insulation, but you've already solved that problem. Score 1 for your decision-making. The fire building goes faster this time because you learned from last night. You stuff the stove full, light it in multiple places, and within 20 minutes you've got heat radiating through the space. The metal stove ticks and pings its familiar song of thermal expansion. You hold your hands near it, absorbing warmth like a plant absorbs sunlight, feeling the energy sink into your bones. Now comes the hard part, going outside and learning to survive like a Yakut person, except without the 8 centuries of accumulated cultural knowledge and the community of experts who would normally teach you. No pressure. The traditional Yakut winter survival system is built on several interconnected principles that seem almost counterintuitive to modern people. First, mobility is death. You don't wander around in winter. You establish a winter camp and you stay there, venturing out only for specific, planned purposes. The Yakut had summer pastures where they moved with their herds, but winter meant settling in one defensible, resource-rich location and hunkering down. Every calorie spent moving is a calorie you can't get back easily. Second, diversification. The Yakut didn't rely on one food source. They had reindeer and horses for meat and milk. They ice fished. They hunted small game. They stored massive quantities of food during fall, berries, fish, meat, all frozen naturally and stacked like cordwood. A traditional Yakut winter storehouse might contain literally tons of food. Your problem is that you arrived in winter with nothing, which means you're trying to implement a summer food gathering strategy in conditions where it barely works. Third, fat is life. The traditional Yakut diet is somewhere around 40 to 50% fat by calories, which would horrify your doctor back home but makes perfect sense here. Fat provides more than twice the calories per gram of carbohydrates or protein, and it's essential for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins in a diet that's light on fresh vegetables. The Yakut eat frozen raw fish, stroganina, frozen raw liver, rich in vitamin C, preventing scurvy, and drink mare's milk fermented into kumis. They're not doing this because it's delicious, though they've acquired the taste. They're doing it because it works. You venture outside as the sun makes its brief, half-hearted appearance on the horizon. The light is weird here, low-angle, golden-orange, stretching shadows into impossible lengths. Everything is tinted amber and blue simultaneously. It's beautiful in a way that makes you understand why people photograph Yakutia obsessively, but it's also terrifying because that sun is going to set in about 3 hours, and you'll have accomplished exactly nothing if you stand here gawking. Firewood first. You scan the landscape and spot a line of scraggly trees, probably larches, the only trees that survive this far north. Larch is perfect for firewood in extreme cold because it's dense and resinous, burns hot, and doesn't rot easily. The Yakut traditionally prefer larch for construction and fuel. But here's the problem. Cutting down a tree when it's minus 60 degrees Celsius is brutally hard. The wood is frozen solid, making it tougher and more likely to shatter your saw blade or dull your axe. Your fingers will go numb. Your face will freeze. And if you work up a sweat, which you will, that moisture becomes a death trap as soon as you stop moving. You've got a knife but no axe, which means you're looking for dead wood, fallen branches, anything already on the ground. You trudge through snow that squeaks under your boots, a sound that only happens at extremely low temperatures when the snow crystals are so cold and hard that they literally crunch against each other. It's weirdly satisfying, this squeak, 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 until you realize that every step is burning calories you don't have. The Yakut technique for winter wood gathering involves a team, a sled, and horses or reindeer to drag the loads. You have none of these things. You're doing this the hard way, which means multiple trips carrying small bundles of wood back to your shelter. It's exhausting, calorie-intensive work, exactly the kind of thing you can't afford to be doing on an empty stomach. After 2 hours, you've accumulated maybe half of what you need for another full day. Your hands are numb despite the gloves. Your face is a mask of ice where your breath has frozen to your scarf. You're exhausted and getting colder by the minute because you've stopped generating heat through movement. This is the critical moment where people make fatal mistakes. They push on, too tired to think clearly, and end up collapsing far from shelter. You make the smart choice and return to your hut. The fire has burned down but not out. You feed it more wood and collapse on the sleeping platform, wrapping yourself in the blanket while your body shivers uncontrollably. This is your body trying to generate heat, burning through the last of yesterday's calories. Your stomach feels like it's trying to digest itself. Hunger is no longer a mild discomfort. It's a sharp, urgent pain. This is when you start thinking seriously about food procurement. The Yakut ice fishing technique is ingenious but labor-intensive. You find a lake. There's one visible from your shelter, a flat white expanse that's probably frozen to a depth of 2 meters or more. You need to cut through that ice, which means you need an ice chisel or a saw and about an hour of hard work. Then you need bait, a line that won't freeze and shatter, and the patience to sit in minus 60 degrees Celsius weather waiting for a fish that's probably in a semi-dormant state and not particularly interested in eating. The Yakut have a quirky tradition around ice fishing. They build small portable shelters directly on the ice, basically tiny tents that block the wind and trap some heat from a small fire or lamp. Inside these shelters, the temperature might be minus 20 degrees Celsius instead of minus 60 degrees Celsius, which is the difference between deeply unpleasant and actively dying. You don't have materials for a fishing shelter, which means you'd be exposed the entire time. There's another option: snares and traps for small game. The Yakut trap rabbits, ptarmigan, and other small animals using techniques that are basically unchanged from the Stone Age because they work. A simple snare is just a loop of cordage, traditionally made from sinew or rawhide, positioned along an animal trail. The animal walks through the loop, triggers it, and gets caught. In theory, it's easy. In practice, you need to know where animals travel, what size loop to make, how to set the trigger mechanism, and how to check your snares regularly without dying of exposure in the process. You don't have cordage. You don't know where the animals are. You've never set a snare in your life. This is going poorly. But here's something the Yakut do that surprises outsiders. They forage even in winter. There's a plant called Labrador tea that grows in this region, and you can dig through the snow to find its evergreen leaves, which make a drinkable tea that's both warming and mildly medicinal. There's pine bark, the inner cambium layer, which is technically edible and provides some calories, though it tastes like what you'd imagine eating a tree would taste like. There are rose hips, frozen berries still clinging to bushes, packed with vitamin C. None of this is easy calories. You might spend 500 calories foraging to gain 200 calories of food, a net loss. But it's something, and something is better than nothing when you're running on empty. You force yourself back outside, this time looking for anything edible. The landscape is stark, white, seemingly lifeless, but the Yakut would tell you that's an illusion. Life is here. It's just hiding, waiting, adapted to conditions that seem impossible. There are willow shrubs poking through the snow. Willows have inner bark that's edible, and the Yakut traditionally used willow bark as both food and medicine. It contains salicin, the compound that aspirin is derived from. You use your knife to strip some bark from a willow, then carefully peel away the rough outer layer to expose the soft, pale inner bark. You chew it experimentally. It's bitter, fibrous, not exactly pleasant, but your body recognizes it as calories and your stomach stops complaining quite so loudly. You gather more, stuffing it into your pockets, feeling like a desperate animal, which, to be fair, you are. By the time you return to shelter, it's mid-afternoon and the sun is already setting. You've been outside maybe 4 hours total, and you're completely exhausted. You've gathered some firewood and some barely edible plant matter. This is survival at its most marginal. You're treading water, not making progress. You think about the Yakut families you saw yesterday going about their business with casual competence, and you realize how vast the knowledge gap is. They know things you don't even know you don't know. Which plants are edible and which will make you sick. How to read the weather by the shape of ice crystals. Where animals shelter. How to pace yourself to avoid sweating. 1,000 little skills accumulated over lifetimes and passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether this kind of traditional knowledge can be learned quickly or whether it requires years of immersion. The answer is probably both. You can learn enough to survive in a few weeks if you have good teachers, but mastery takes decades. You don't have decades. You've got days, maybe a week if you're lucky and smart. The blanket wraps around you like a promise. You made the right choice, you tell yourself. Without it, you'd already be hypothermic. With it, you're merely starving, which is slower and gives you time to adapt. The fire crackles. Outside, the stars emerge, indifferent and eternal. Tomorrow you try fishing, or trapping, or something. Tonight, you chew willow bark and try to convince yourself it counts as dinner. Day 3 begins with a dream about pizza. Thick crust, melted cheese, pepperoni glistening with grease. And you wake up with your mouth watering and your stomach cramping so hard you curl into a fetal position. This is what real hunger feels like. Not the I skipped lunch hunger of your previous life, but the deep, gnawing emptiness that your body interprets as an emergency. Your liver has burned through its glycogen stores. Your body is now in full ketosis, breaking down fat for fuel, and the transition makes you feel weak, dizzy, slightly nauseous. The willow bark you chewed yesterday provided maybe 100 calories. Barely a dent in the 5,000 calorie deficit you're running. You need protein. You need fat. You need actual food, and you need it today or tomorrow's wake-up is going to be significantly worse than this one. The ice fishing option keeps nagging at you because it's theoretically achievable. The lake is maybe 400 meters from your shelter, close enough that you won't die of exposure getting there, far enough that it'll cost you energy. You've got your knife, which is laughably inadequate for cutting through 2 meters of ice, but you remember seeing some tools in the shelter's storage area. You investigate and find, blessed miracle, an ice chisel, basically a long metal rod with a sharpened blade on one end. Someone left it here deliberately, probably for exactly this purpose. The Yakutian culture of leaving survival supplies in emergency shelters has just saved your life, or at least extended it. You also find some fishing line wrapped around a wooden spool, and a few crude hooks fashioned from bent metal. This is happening. You're actually going to try ice fishing in -65 degrees Celsius weather, using techniques you've only seen on YouTube videos filmed in places that were balmy by comparison. The walk to the lake is brutal. The snow is deep enough that each step requires lifting your foot high, punching through the crust, then extracting it for the next step. It's exhausting, calorie-burning work, and you're doing it on an empty stomach. You can feel your body protesting, your muscles shaky and weak. But you push on because the alternative is staying in the shelter and slowly starving, and at least this way you're doing something. The lake surface is wind-scoured in some places, with ice exposed and gleaming like glass. In other places, snow has drifted into small dunes. You pick a spot that looks promising, near where you can see some frost-covered reeds poking through, which suggests shallower water and possibly more fish activity. This is pure guessing on your part, but the Yakut would tell you that fishing is always part knowledge and part luck, and you're severely lacking in the knowledge department. You start chiseling. The ice chisel is heavier than you expected, and swinging it requires you to lift it overhead and bring it down with force. The first strike produces a satisfying crack and a small chip of ice. The second strike, same result. By the 10th strike, you've penetrated maybe 2 centimeters. You've got 198 more centimeters to go. The arithmetic is depressing. This is where traditional Yakut ice fishing involves multiple people taking turns, because one person trying to chisel through 2 meters of ice will either die of exhaustion or freeze to death before completing the job. But you're alone, so you develop a rhythm. 20 strikes, rest for a minute while your arms stop screaming, 20 more strikes, rest again. Your breath comes in gasps that freeze instantly into ice fog around your head. Sweat begins to form under your inadequate parka, which is exactly what you were trying to avoid. After an hour, you've penetrated maybe 30 centimeters. You're not even a quarter of the way through. Your arms feel like rubber. Your hands, even inside gloves, are cramping from gripping the chisel. And you're starting to shiver from the combination of exhaustion and sweat-dampened clothing. This is how people die in Yakutia. They push too hard on a task, generate moisture, then cool down and can't get warm again. You have to make a decision. Keep going and risk serious exposure, or retreat and try again tomorrow. The smart choice is retreat, but tomorrow you'll be even weaker from another day without real food. There's no good option, just variations of bad. You keep chiseling. Something stubborn in you refuses to walk away from this hole after investing so much energy. 90 minutes in, you're at about 50 centimeters deep. The hole is now deep enough that you have to lean over it to strike the bottom, and chips of ice are flying up into your face. Your back hurts. Your shoulders hurt. Everything hurts. Then you feel it. The chisel punches through and suddenly there's no resistance. Water wells up in the hole, dark and ominous, and you jump back instinctively. You've done it. You've broken through to the lake. The hole immediately starts to freeze at the edges, forming a thin skim of new ice, but there's open water in the center. Actual liquid water at the bottom of a 2-meter shaft of ice. Now comes the fishing part, which requires different knowledge you don't have. What do fish eat in winter? What bait do you use? The Yakut traditionally use small pieces of fish or fish eggs as bait, creating a sustainable cycle where today's catch becomes tomorrow's bait. You don't have fish. You don't have much of anything except freezing hands and desperation. You try tying a hook to the line and dropping it into the hole with no bait, just hoping a fish might be curious or aggressive enough to bite bare metal. This is not a strategy. This is hope masquerading as a plan. You sit by the hole, holding the line, feeling absolutely nothing except cold seeping through your pants and boots. The ice beneath you is conducting heat away from your body at an alarming rate. You can feel yourself getting colder by the minute. 15 minutes. Nothing. 30 minutes. Still nothing. Your fingers are going numb again, and you're shivering continuously now. The sweat you generated chiseling has turned your inner clothing layer damp, and that dampness is wicking away your body heat. You're in trouble. This is when the Yakut knowledge system would tell you to abandon this attempt, return to shelter, dry out, warm up, and try again later with proper preparation and bait. But you've invested so much energy in this hole that leaving feels like surrender. You're running on stubbornness now, which is not a renewable resource. 45 minutes. Your shivering is becoming violent, uncontrollable. Your hands can barely hold the fishing line. And then, maybe it's your imagination, maybe it's real, you feel a tiny tug. Then another. Something is down there investigating your hook. You wait, trying to control your shaking hands, trying to feel through numb fingers. Another tug, harder this time. You yank up on the line with whatever strength you have left. Nothing. The hook comes up empty, mocking you. The disappointment is crushing, almost physical. You've spent 3 hours, burned probably 2,000 calories, generated dangerous moisture in your clothing, and achieved exactly nothing. This is failure, pure and simple. You retreat to the shelter, stumbling and weak. The fire has died again, of course it has, and the interior is glacially cold. You use some of your dwindling wood supply to rebuild the fire, then strip off your outer layers and hang them to dry. You're shivering so hard your teeth are chattering, and it takes 20 minutes of huddling by the stove before you start to feel remotely human again. The hunger is worse now, sharpened by the physical exertion and failure. Your body is screaming for food, and you have nothing to give it except more willow bark, which you chew mechanically while staring at the fire. Here's what the Yakut people understood that you're learning the hard way. Winter survival isn't about heroic individual efforts. It's about preparation, community, stored resources, and knowing when to rest versus when to push. You're doing everything wrong, spending energy you don't have on tasks you're not equipped for, all while running a massive caloric deficit. But there's another element to traditional Yakut survival that might actually help you. They didn't waste anything. Every part of every animal was used. Bones were boiled for marrow and made into tools. Sinew became cordage. Hides became clothing and shelter. Even fish guts were used as bait or fed to dogs. The Yakut lived in a closed-loop system where waste was literally impossible to afford. You look around the shelter with new eyes. What resources exist here that you're not seeing? The willow bark is food, yes, but willow is also incredibly flexible and strong. It can be woven into baskets, twisted into cordage for snares. The fish line you have could be used for multiple hooks, increasing your odds. The knife could be used to make additional tools. There's a technique called primitive survival that modern enthusiasts practice, creating everything you need from natural materials. The Yakut weren't doing this as a hobby. They were doing it as a lifestyle, and they got very good at it. A skilled Yakut person could walk into the wilderness with just a knife and create a full survival system within days. You're not skilled, but you have some advantages. You've seen modern tools, you understand basic engineering principles even if you can't articulate them, and you have that most dangerous thing, desperation. You spend the afternoon doing something that feels counterproductive but might pay off later. You make a simple snare from the fishing line. You find a game trail near the shelter. You can tell it's a trail by the subtle depression in the snow and some small tracks that might be rabbit or ptarmigan. You fashion a loop, set it with a simple trigger mechanism that will tighten when disturbed, and position it at rabbit head height along the trail. The Yakut would use dozens of these snares, checking them daily, playing a numbers game where even a 10% success rate means regular protein. You have one snare, which gives you maybe a 1% chance of catching anything, but 1% is better than the 0% you have with ice fishing right now. As the sun sets, and it sets early, giving you maybe 4 hours of usable light per day this time of year, you take stock. You've used 3 days of time. You've got enough firewood for maybe 2 more days if you're conservative. You've eaten perhaps 300 calories total since making your choice, while burning at least 15,000. Your body is consuming itself and you can feel it. A weakness in your muscles, a fuzziness in your thinking, a constant cold that seems to come from inside rather than outside. But you're still alive. The blanket has kept you from hypothermia. That single decision, blanket over food, has bought you these 3 days. The question is whether you can convert these days into a sustainable survival system before your body gives out entirely. Outside, the temperature drops to its nightly low. The stars will overhead in their ancient patterns. Somewhere out there, a rabbit might walk into your snare, or might not. The universe is indifferent. The cold is patient, and you're running out of time. You wake on day 4 to silence so complete it's almost solid, and for a disorienting moment you can't remember where you are. Then the cold registers, not the knife-edge cold of outside, but the deep, seeping cold of a shelter that's been without fire for hours. Your head feels stuffed with cotton, your thoughts moving slowly like they're wading through syrup. This is your brain running on fumes. rationing glucose to keep essential systems functioning while non-essential things like complex reasoning and good judgment get throttled back. The psychological effects of extreme cold combined with starvation are well documented but rarely discussed, probably because they're terrifying. Your brain, that 3-pound lump of fatty tissue that defines your entire existence, is incredibly vulnerable to environmental stressors. It requires about 20% of your total energy expenditure just to keep running, and when energy is scarce, it starts making sacrifices. Short-term memory goes first. You'll forget things you did 5 minutes ago. Then executive function degrades. Planning, decision-making, impulse control all become harder. Eventually, if things get bad enough, you start experiencing what polar explorers called the horrors. Hallucinations, paranoia, a creeping sense that something is fundamentally wrong with reality itself. You're not there yet, but you can feel the edges of it. Your dreams last night were vivid and disturbing. Not the food dreams anymore, but stranger things. You dreamed you were speaking to someone in the shelter, having a full conversation, and when you woke you couldn't remember what you discussed or even who the person was. You dreamed the walls were closing in, that the temperature was rising instead of falling, that you were drowning in warm water. These aren't random. They're your brain misfiring, trying to process stress it wasn't designed to handle. The Yakut people have folklore about winter spirits, entities that appear to lost travelers, sometimes helpful, sometimes malicious, always uncanny. Western anthropologists love to analyze these stories as metaphors, but historians still argue whether they might actually be cultural descriptions of hallucinations and altered mental states caused by extreme cold and isolation. When you're alone in minus 65 degrees Celsius darkness for months, and your brain is running on minimal calories, the line between folklore and neurology gets blurry. You force yourself up, rebuild the fire with trembling hands, and check your snare. This requires putting on your dried outer layers and venturing into the pre-dawn darkness, and it takes every ounce of willpower you possess. Your body is actively rebelling against the idea of movement, of burning more precious calories, of exposing yourself to the cold again. But you go because the snare represents hope, and hope is the only thing keeping you functional. The snare is empty. Of course it is. The loop sits undisturbed in the snow, mocking your amateur efforts. No rabbit was dumb enough or unlucky enough to wander into your one trap. The Yakut hunters would have 30 traps out, would check them systematically, would know from tracks and signs whether game was even in the area. You have none of this knowledge, just desperation and failing luck. Back in the shelter, you sit by the fire and feel something dangerous happening inside your head. It's not quite despair. Despair would require more energy than you have, but it's a kind of emotional numbing, a flatness where motivation should be. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, the state where repeated failures convince your brain that effort is pointless. It's a survival mechanism in some contexts. It prevents you from wasting energy on impossible tasks. But in your current situation, it's a death sentence. If you give up trying, you die. It's that simple. This is where the real test happens, not in your muscles or your metabolism, but in your mind. Can you keep trying when everything tells you it's pointless? Can you maintain hope when evidence suggests there is none? The Yakut cultural answer to this is interesting. They don't rely on individual psychological resilience. They rely on community, on obligation to others, on routines and rituals that keep you moving even when you don't want to. You don't stay alive for yourself. You stay alive for your family, your herd, your responsibilities. But you're alone. You have no family here, no responsibilities except to yourself. And that self is increasingly feeling like it might not be worth the effort to save. You shake your head violently, trying to clear the fog. This is the cold talking, the hunger talking, not reality. You're not thinking clearly because your brain literally doesn't have enough fuel to think clearly. You need to recognize this, compensate for it, not trust your emotions right now. There's a psychological technique that Antarctic researchers use called small wins. When you're in an impossible situation, you don't focus on the impossible goal, survive the winter, get rescued, etc. You focus on achievable micro-goals that give you a sense of progress and control. Get the fire lit. Achievable. Dry your clothes. Achievable. Melt some snow for water. Achievable. String together enough small wins and you stay functional long enough for circumstances to change. So you make a list of tasks for today, each one small and concrete. Keep the fire going for at least 6 hours. Make 2 more snares, you have enough fishing line. Try to identify one edible plant or resource you haven't used yet. Do some kind of physical movement to maintain muscle mass. Survive until tomorrow. Notice that catch a fish and trap a rabbit aren't on the list, because those outcomes depend partly on luck. The list contains only things you can actually control. You start with task 3 because it gets you moving and thinking. The Yakut survival plant knowledge is extensive, built over centuries of trial and error that undoubtedly included people dying from eating the wrong things. You obviously don't have that knowledge base, but you can work with what's visible and make educated guesses. There's a type of lichen that grows on trees here, you've seen it, gray-green crusty stuff that looks completely inedible. But you remember reading somewhere that certain lichens are edible after boiling, though others are toxic, and you definitely can't tell the difference. That's out. Too risky. There are rose hips still clinging to bushes, frozen solid. You gather a handful, bring them back to the shelter, and drop them in a small pot of melted snow to make tea. Rose hips are loaded with vitamin C. They're what kept British sailors from getting scurvy when they couldn't get citrus. The resulting tea is tart, almost bitter, but its liquid calories and vitamins may be 50 calories worth if you're lucky. You drink it slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your chest. The pine trees are another option. You've been avoiding them because the idea of eating tree bark seems like a final stage desperation move, but actually, pine needles make a decent tea that's also rich in vitamin C. The Yakut used it, other northern cultures used it, and you've got nothing to lose. You gather some fresh-looking needles, boil them, and create a tea that tastes like drinking a Christmas tree. It's not good, but it's not terrible, and it's something. 2 more snares get made and positioned at different game trails. Your odds are still terrible, but they're 3 times better than they were with 1 snare. That's progress. That's a small win. For physical movement, you do something that feels absurd but is actually smart. You exercise. Not a full workout, you don't have the calories for that, but light movement to keep your muscles engaged and prevent the kind of rapid muscle wasting that happens during starvation. You do slow bodyweight squats, careful stretches, gentle movements that keep blood flowing without burning too many calories. The Yakut people stay active all winter despite the cold, because inactivity leads to rapid physical decline. But it's the psychological deterioration that's really dangerous, and you can feel it accelerating. The isolation is brutal. You've been alone for 4 days, which doesn't sound like much, but in extreme conditions, time dilates. Each hour feels like 3. You have no one to talk to, no external validation of your perceptions, no reality check when your thoughts start spiraling into dark places. The Yakut dealt with winter isolation through storytelling, music, social gatherings in the warmth of the banya. They maintained human connection deliberately, understanding intuitively what psychologists later proved. Isolation damages human cognition and emotional regulation. Solitary confinement is a form of torture for good reason. Your brain needs social input the way it needs food and water. You start talking out loud to yourself, which feels crazy but actually isn't. Verbalizing your thoughts forces you to organize them, to think more clearly, to maintain the distinction between internal dialogue and external reality. You narrate your actions. Now I'm adding wood to the fire. The flames are catching on the dry bark. I can feel the heat increasing. It's grounding, centering, a small defense against the cognitive slide. There's a phenomenon that solo Arctic explorers report called the third man syndrome, a persistent sense that someone else is present, watching, sometimes even offering advice. It's a hallucination, obviously, a trick of an isolated brain trying to create the social connection it craves. But many explorers report it as comforting rather than frightening. You don't have that yet, but you wonder if it's coming, if at some point your brain will simply invent a companion to make the loneliness bearable. Night falls again and you're still alive. That's something. You've added a few hundred calories from plant sources, nowhere near enough, but not nothing. Your 3 snares are out there, waiting. Your firewood will last another day, maybe 2. You're still in the game, even if the game is rigged against you. You wrap yourself in the blanket. Remember the blanket? The choice that's kept you alive this long. And feel a wave of gratitude for past you who made that decision. Without this wool wrapped around you, you'd be dead already, frozen or hypothermic or too cognitively impaired to maintain the fire. The blanket has been your silent partner, your constant ally, the single piece of gear standing between you and the void. Sleep comes fitfully, interrupted by cold and hunger and strange half-dreams. You dream you're back at the lake, chiseling through ice, but the hole goes down forever, miles deep, and at the bottom you can hear something moving, something large, something that shouldn't exist. You wake gasping, and it takes minutes to convince yourself it was just a dream, that your mind is playing tricks, that the isolation and starvation are distorting reality. Day 5 is going to be worse. You can feel it coming, like a storm on the horizon. Your body is eating itself, and your mind is starting to fray at the edges. But you're not dead yet, and as long as you're not dead, you keep trying. Small wins, 1 hour at a time. Survive until tomorrow. The cold presses in, the darkness waits, and somewhere in your brain, thoughts move slowly through thickening fog, trying desperately to keep the light on just a little longer. Day 5 breaks with a sound that jolts you from sleep. Something outside, close to the shelter, moving in the snow. Your heart hammers as you lie perfectly still, wrapped in your blanket, trying to identify the noise through the thick walls. Scratching, definitely scratching, then silence, then more movement. Your first thought is bear, which would be catastrophic, but then you remember that bears are hibernating. Wolves? Possible, but unlikely to be this close to a human structure. Your sleep-deprived, calorie-starved brain cycles through increasingly irrational possibilities before landing on the most likely. Something small, investigating your snares. You move with exaggerated care, pulling on your outer layers as quietly as possible, trying not to make any sound that might scare away whatever's out there. The fire has died completely overnight. You slept through the cold, which is worrying in itself, a sign that your body is adapting in ways that aren't entirely healthy. You grab your knife, not as a weapon but as a tool, and ease the door open. Dawn light reveals a scene that makes your heart leap. One of your snares has triggered, and in the loop, struggling weakly, is a rabbit. An actual, real, protein-filled rabbit. It's small, already half frozen from being caught in the snare overnight, but it's food. Real food. Your hands shake as you approach, and you feel something uncomfortably close to tears prickling at your eyes. This is what desperation does. It makes a single rabbit feel like salvation. The Yakut method for dispatching small game is quick and efficient. A sharp blow to the back of the head or neck that causes instant death. You've never killed anything larger than a spider in your life, and the reality of it makes you hesitate. The rabbit looks at you with dark, uncomprehending eyes. Then your stomach cramps violently, reminding you that philosophical qualms are a luxury you cannot afford, and you do what needs to be done. It's not elegant and you don't feel good about it, but it's done. Now comes the part where modern people with no practical skills realize how utterly unprepared they are for survival. Field dressing an animal. You know the theory, you've seen it in videos, read about it in books, but theory and practice are separated by a vast gulf of blood, fur, and viscera. The Yakut children learn this by age 6 or 7, watching their parents, practicing on small animals, gradually building the muscle memory and knowledge base. You're learning it right now, at the moment of maximum desperation, with shaking hands and no room for error. You make mistakes. Of course you do. You nick the intestines while trying to open the body cavity, which contaminates some of the meat. You struggle to separate the hide from the flesh cleanly. Your knife skills are terrible, and you waste meat through sheer incompetence. A Yakut hunter could process this rabbit in 5 minutes and lose almost nothing. You take 30 minutes and probably ruin 20% of the usable meat. But even with your amateur butchering, you're left with maybe 500 grams of meat and organ tissue, at roughly 1,200 calories total. This is the most valuable object you've possessed since arriving in Yakutia. The liver you eat raw right there, still warm. This is what the Yakut do, and it's not primitive savagery, it's practical nutrition. The liver is packed with vitamins, especially vitamin A and B vitamins, and cooking would destroy some of those nutrients. It tastes metallic, dense, rich in a way that makes your stomach immediately settle into satisfied silence. Your body recognizes what it's been missing and responds with almost instantaneous gratitude. The rest of the meat you bring inside and cook over the fire, skewered on a stick. The smell of roasting meat in the small shelter is overwhelming, intoxicating, almost hallucinatory in its intensity. Your mouth floods with saliva. You can barely wait for the meat to cook through before you're tearing into it, burning your fingers and tongue in your haste. And here's where something interesting happens psychologically. The moment you start eating real food, your mental state shifts dramatically. The fog in your head begins to clear. Your thoughts sharpen. The emotional flatness lifts slightly. This isn't placebo, this is your brain receiving actual glucose and fat, firing up neural pathways that have been running on minimal power. Within an hour of eating, you feel more like yourself than you have in days. The transformation is startling, almost frightening in how it demonstrates just how degraded your cognitive function had become. This is the thing about modern survival gear versus ancient survival wisdom. All the high-tech insulation and fancy equipment in the world doesn't replace the fundamental need for calories. The Yakut understood this instinctively. Their entire material culture prioritized food acquisition and preparation. The warmest clothing, the best shelter, the sharpest tools, all of it ultimately served the goal of securing enough calories to survive winter. You chose the blanket over food, and it was probably the right choice for immediate survival, but this rabbit has just proven that long-term survival requires solving the calorie equation. You sit by the fire, genuinely warm for the first time in days, with actual food in your stomach, and you can think strategically again. The high-tech approach to survival would be to have everything planned out in advance, to bring freeze-dried meals and insulated shelters and GPS beacons. The Yakut approach is different. It's about skills and knowledge and the ability to extract resources from an environment that appears barren. Your modern gear failed you, your parka isn't warm enough, your sleeping bag is inadequate, your food ran out. But that blanket, that simple piece of ancient technology that's essentially unchanged since humans first domesticated sheep, has kept you alive. And now, using the even more ancient technology of the snare, you've secured food. There's a lesson here about appropriate technology. The most advanced solution isn't always the most reliable. Sometimes the old ways persist because they're actually superior in specific contexts. Historians still argue about why certain technologies get abandoned and others persist. Is it purely about effectiveness? Or do cultural factors, path dependency, and economic systems play roles? In Yakutia, you can see technological layering, traditional clothing made with modern synthetic additions, ancient hunting techniques combined with metal traps, oral knowledge supplemented by weather reports from distant meteorological stations. But when everything fails, when you're stripped down to basics, the ancient technologies reveal their value. You can't eat a smartphone. You can't burn money for warmth. But wool, fire, meat, shelter, these are the foundations that everything else is built on. You spend the afternoon in a better mental state than you've had since arriving. You set out 2 more snares, bringing your total to 5. You check the ice fishing hole and find it's frozen solid again. But now that you have some calories on board, you have the energy to reopen it. You work more carefully this time, pacing yourself, avoiding the sweat and crash cycle that nearly killed you before. You don't catch anything, but the hole is open, the line is baited with a scrap of rabbit intestine, and you have hope. More importantly, you process the rabbit hide. It's small, barely enough for anything practical. But the Yakut waste nothing, and neither can you. You scrape the hide as clean as you can, stretch it and set it to dry. 1 rabbit hide is useless. 10 rabbit hides could be sewn into mittens or a hat. 50 could be a vest. The Yakut made entire winter coats from rabbit fur, lightweight, warm, effective. You're thinking long-term now, thinking about accumulation rather than just immediate survival. The rabbit sinew gets carefully extracted and dried. It's tedious, detail-oriented work, but sinew is incredibly useful, stronger than plant fiber for cordage, perfect for sewing, essential for making more snares. Each rabbit can provide enough sinew for 2 or 3 more snares, creating a positive feedback loop. Catch 1 rabbit, make more traps, catch more rabbits. This is how you bootstrap yourself from crisis to stability. Even the bones don't get wasted. You crack them to access the marrow, rich, fatty, calorie-dense, and then drop the bones into a pot of melted snow to make broth. The Yakut bone broth tradition isn't about trendy wellness culture. It's about extracting every possible calorie and nutrient from scarce resources. The resulting broth is thin but nourishing, and you sip it throughout the evening. By nightfall, you've consumed maybe 1,500 calories, still well short of what you're burning, but infinitely better than the 300-calorie days you were suffering through. Your body responds by ramping up metabolism slightly, generating more heat, allowing you to sleep more deeply. The blanket wraps around you, and for the first time since making your choice, you feel like maybe, just maybe, you made the right decision and have a chance of surviving long enough to see it pay off. But here's the thing about survival in extreme environments. One good day doesn't mean you've won. It means you've bought yourself more time. The firewood is running low again. The weather could turn worse. Your other snares might never catch anything. That rabbit was luck as much as skill, and luck is not a sustainable strategy. The Yakut have a saying, you learn it from the shopkeeper who spoke no English, transmitted through gestures and context, that roughly translates to winter always wins. We just try to lose slowly. It's a philosophy of realistic pessimism, of understanding that you're not conquering nature, just negotiating a temporary ceasefire. Pride is deadly. Overconfidence kills. You stay humble, stay cautious, and you survive one more day. Outside, the stars wheel through their ancient patterns. The temperature hits its nightly low, probably minus 70 degrees Celsius. Your shelter creaks and settles. And inside, wrapped in wool with rabbit in your belly, you sleep. Not peacefully, never peacefully, but you sleep. And tomorrow you do it all again. Time starts to blur. You're not sure if it's day 7 or day 8 when you wake to find frost on the inside of the shelter walls. Ice crystals that have formed from your breath overnight, creating delicate fern patterns in the dim light. Your body has entered a new equilibrium. Not healthy, not sustainable long-term, but functional. You're burning fat stores, supplementing with whatever calories you can trap or forage, and the blanket continues its silent work of keeping your core temperature stable enough that your metabolism doesn't spiral into crisis. 2 more rabbits have fallen to your snares over the intervening days. You've become almost ritualistic about checking them. Early morning, just after first light, moving quietly through the snow with a hunter's patience you didn't know you possessed. Each catch feels like a minor miracle, though you're starting to understand it's not miracle at all, it's probability. 5 snares checked daily for a week gives you 35 opportunities. A 10% success rate, which is reasonable for crude snares on decent game trails, means 3 or 4 catches per week. The math works barely if nothing goes wrong. But things always go wrong in Yakutia. On what you think is day 9, a wind picks up. Not the catastrophic blizzard wind that would kill you in minutes if caught outside, but a steady, brutal wind that drops the effective temperature to something approaching minus 85 degrees Celsius. This is wind chill in its purest, deadliest form. You can't go outside. Literally cannot. Opening the door for even 30 seconds would flood the shelter with cold that would take hours to recover from, and you'd lose fingers or facial tissue to frostbite in the time it took to check your snares. So you don't. You stay inside, tend the fire with your dwindling wood supply, and accept that whatever might be caught in your traps will freeze solid before you can retrieve it. The psychological challenge of this enforced inactivity is immense. You're trapped in a space barely larger than a prison cell, with nothing to do but feed the fire and think. The Yakushan winter is as much a mental endurance test as a physical one. Historians still argue about how pre-industrial peoples dealt with months of confinement. Some point to elaborate craft traditions, storytelling, and social structures that kept people engaged. Others suggest that depression and cabin fever were simply accepted as part of winter, something to be endured like the cold itself. You try to keep your mind occupied. You work on the rabbit hides with obsessive detail, scraping and stretching and softening them. You've now got 3 hides in various stages of processing, which still isn't enough for anything substantial, but the work keeps your hands busy and your thoughts from spiraling. You practice knots with the sinew cordage you've made, creating increasingly complex patterns just to prove to yourself that your fine motor control hasn't degraded too much. But the isolation is doing something to you. You find yourself having full conversations with people who aren't there. Not hallucinations exactly, because you know they're not real, but elaborate imaginary dialogues that feel necessary for mental health. You argue with your mother about whether you should have worn warmer socks. You explain your snare-setting technique to a friend who's actually thousands of miles away. You narrate your actions to an invisible documentary crew. is strange. It's probably not entirely healthy, but it keeps you tethered to something resembling sanity. The wind eventually dies down after 36 hours. You've been counting time by the fire cycle, how often you need to add wood, and you venture outside to a transformed landscape. Snow has drifted into new configurations, erasing trails and landmarks. Your snares are buried. 2 of them have been torn free by the wind and are simply gone, along with whatever cordage and effort they represented. The 3rd trap you find is still set but empty. The 4th and 5th are nowhere to be seen, lost under fresh snow. This is the moment where modern people would despair, and you feel it tugging at you, the sense that you're fighting a losing battle against an environment that has infinite resources for killing you while you have only finite resources for staying alive. But then you remember something the Yakut culture embodies. Persistence isn't about never failing, it's about failing repeatedly and continuing anyway. Every Yakut hunter has lost traps to weather. Every family has faced winters where nothing seemed to work. The ones who survived weren't the luckiest or the strongest. They were the ones who kept trying after everyone else gave up. So you rebuild. You make new snares from your precious remaining cordage. You dig out the buried traps. You reset everything and you start again because the alternative is sitting in your shelter waiting to starve, and at least this way you're doing something. The ice fishing hole has frozen over again, and this time you don't have the energy to reopen it. That door has closed, at least temporarily. Your caloric intake over the past 10 days, if it's really been 10 days, you're losing track, has probably averaged 800 calories per day, while you're burning something like 4,500. The math is brutal and unsustainable. You've lost weight, you can feel it in how your clothes hang loose, how your ribs are more prominent when you wash yourself with heated snow water. Your body is consuming itself, burning muscle along with fat, and there's only so long that can continue. But here's what you've gained: knowledge. You know how to set a snare now, really know it, not just in theory. You know which plants are safe to eat and which to avoid. You know how to read animal tracks in snow, how to identify likely game trails. You know how to process a rabbit with minimal waste. You know how your body responds to different levels of cold, how to recognize the early signs of frostbite or hypothermia. This knowledge wouldn't have saved you on day 1. You needed the blanket for that. But it's keeping you alive now, transforming you from a helpless victim of circumstance into something approaching a functional subsistence hunter. The Yakut people would tell you that you're still laughably incompetent, and they'd be right. A real Yakut hunter would have 10 times your trap density, would be ice fishing successfully, would have found food sources you're completely missing, would be thriving where you're merely surviving. But the gap between your day 1 self and your day 10 self is vast. You've compressed what should be years of learning into days of desperate necessity. There's a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. The idea that extreme adversity can produce positive changes in people, making them stronger or more capable than they were before. You're not sure growth is the right word for what you're experiencing. Transformation through suffering feels more accurate, but something fundamental has shifted in you. The person who arrived in Yakutia couldn't have imagined eating raw rabbit liver or sleeping comfortably in minus 50 degrees Celsius temperatures, or finding beauty in the particular way ice crystals catch dawn light. That person would have found all of this horrific. You've become someone different, someone harder and more capable, though you're not entirely sure you like who you're becoming. Night falls again, as it always does, swallowing the brief hours of twilight. You're down to maybe a day's worth of firewood, which means tomorrow you need to gather more regardless of the weather or your energy levels. The blanket wraps around you in the darkness, and you feel a strange affection for this inanimate object that's been your most reliable companion. It doesn't judge you. It doesn't fail you. It just does its job, trapping heat, keeping the void at bay. You think about the food you sacrificed, now frozen somewhere outside the shelter door, perfectly preserved and utterly inaccessible because accessing it would mean admitting defeat, admitting you made the wrong choice. Part of you wants to retrieve it, to give up on hunting and just eat your original supplies and accept that you'll starve in a week instead of 2 weeks, but at least you'll starve well-fed. But you don't. You made a choice, and you're seeing it through because giving up now would make all the suffering meaningless. The wind picks up again, rattling the shelter. Outside, the temperature is doing things that would make meteorologists write excited papers. You're in the realm of temperature where unusual physical phenomena occur, where breath doesn't just freeze but crystallizes into shapes, where metal becomes brittle, where the normal rules stop applying. This is the edge of human habitability, the place where our species probably shouldn't be able to survive but does anyway through stubbornness, ingenuity, and yes, adequate insulation. You drift towards sleep, your mind wandering through strange territories. You think about the Yakut children at school, walking to class in -50 degrees Celsius weather like it's nothing special. You think about the generations of people who've survived here, who raised families and told stories and built a culture in this frozen wasteland. You think about how privilege is not having to know these things, not having to develop calluses on your soul along with your hands. And in the borderland between waking and sleep, you understand something fundamental. The blanket versus food question was never really about blanket or food. It was about what kind of death you were willing to risk. Fast death from exposure or slow death from starvation. You chose slow, which has given you time to learn, time to adapt, time for luck to intercede. Whether that time is enough, whether you'll actually survive to tell this story, remains an open question. But for now, for tonight, you're still breathing, still thinking, still wrapped in wool against the infinite cold. The stars will overhead, indifferent and eternal. And somewhere in the darkness, spring is coming. Slowly, impossibly slowly, but coming. You just have to survive long enough to meet it. The wind howls, the fire burns low, and you sleep the uneasy sleep of someone who knows tomorrow will demand everything you have, and maybe more than that. But tomorrow is tomorrow's problem. Tonight you rest and let the blanket do its work. The shelter grows quieter now, softer somehow, as if the cold itself is settling into sleep alongside you. Your breathing slows, each exhale a gentle fog in the dim firelight, each inhale pulling in air that doesn't hurt quite so much anymore. Your body has learned the rhythm of this place, the patient mathematics of survival, the long, slow conversation between warmth and void. Outside, the stars continue their ancient vigil, pinpricks of light in the vast Siberian night, indifferent to your small struggles, your small triumphs. The blanket holds you gently, this simple thing of wool and care, the choice that mattered more than you knew when you made it. Every fiber working quietly, trapping heat, building a pocket of survival around your tired body. You think, drowsily, about the Yakut people sleeping in their warm homes, generations of knowledge wrapped around them like invisible blankets. You think about the rabbits in their burrows, the fish suspended in cold water beneath impossible ice, all the hidden life persisting in this frozen world. Everything here knows how to wait, how to endure, how to find warmth in unlikely places. Your thoughts grow soft at the edges, losing their sharp urgency, drifting like snow in still air. The hunger is distant now, the cold a familiar companion rather than an enemy. You've learned something essential here, something about what humans can endure, what we can become when we have to. The fire whispers down to embers, painting the walls in gentle orange and shadow. Your heartbeat slows to its sleeping rhythm, and somewhere deep in your bones, you know you'll wake tomorrow, still alive, still trying, still choosing to continue this impossible conversation with the cold. The darkness becomes complete, but it's not frightening anymore. It's just rest, sweet dreams,